All right, so I figured I might as well just continue building upon this test-driven development video that I've been doing. So in the last video, I made a little command line script where basically you can run the CLI file and you can pass it a number like 300. Or sorry, you can pass it a command and a number. And that basically just takes the number of calories you had that meal or whatever, and it adds it to a file here, okay? So nothing too crazy, and kind of walk you through how we can potentially use test-driven development to build this out. So the next thing I want to kind of do is I want to maybe see if we can use TDD to add in another command to print out all of the calories that are in this out file. So the functionality is super simple, and honestly, if I wasn't doing test-driven development, I'd have this coded in like 5 minutes. But with TDD, like, you got to kind of slow down, think about stuff, make sure you're doing stuff correctly. All right, so if you haven't watched the last video, basically the CLI command allows us to call this command like this, pass it a command and pass it a number. And you see here we get the command and the calories from the arguments here. We basically pass those to our file called index. And then this index is just going to check the command and do different logic based on what was passed in, and it throws an error if something bad was passed in. So there's tons of stuff we could do and add and change to make this more robust, but let's just try to keep this simple. So the first thing I want to do in this video is let's try to add support for a new command called sum. And what this command does is basically loop through this file and sums up all of the things in it. So before we even touch implementation, let's try to do a test, right? We're doing test-driven development, so you want to write a test that's failing first. Then you go back to your implementation and you actually try to make that test pass. So in this index.test file, this is using Jest. We basically import that index function. And I have two tests right now. One is verifying that it should try to persist that 500 calories to somewhere if you pass the add command. And the other test we have should throw an error if an invalid command. So if you pass in subtract, it throws an error because subtract isn't actually valid. So what we can do is add a third test, and I'm going to say should print the sum of all of the calories in the provided, I don't know, calorie reader or something. I don't really know. We'll have to figure this out as we do it. So to add support for a sum method, we need to be able to basically call our method index. We need to pass it a command called sum, and I think that's about it. So basically, we need to make sure that we get the result here. Let me try to make sure I'm explaining this better. So again, with test-driven development, you write the test first, and it kind of helps you visualize like what would the actual interface need to do? How would the interface change to support what you're trying to do? In our case, we probably just need to pass in another command called sum, and that should return a result, right? Maybe I should call it sum. And depending on what was stored in the file, sum should be something, right? But if you remember, the way we wrote index, it's kind of abstracted away. It doesn't know where the calories are stored. It doesn't know where, like, if it's in a file system or a database. So we need to pass some type of adapter, I guess you can call it, to this index method so that it knows how to read all the calories that are stored. So I'm going to go ahead and probably do like, I'll say calorie file reader. How about that? And what this is basically an adapter, which is going to, actually, let me call get all calories. All right, this is probably a much better naming for this. In fact, I should probably go back and rename how I called calorie writer. I'm sorry. Let me call this calorie reader. And what this is an adapter, right? I'm passing an interface to this index, and we assume that when we call this thing, whatever calorie reader sends you back, it's going to basically be a list or an array of calories. So let's make sure we first mock this out. So I'm going to say const calorie reader spy is equal to jest. We don't even need a jest function. This is going to be a stub. So when you're doing testing, there's something called a stub, where you don't need to do these fancy spies or mocks. You literally just make a blank function or something, and have that return what you want. So in our case, let's just have this function return an array of like 100, 400, and 300. And if you add those up, you get about 5, 6, 7, 8. I believe this should be 800. So the idea is that whatever index does, at some point it's going to call the calorie reader, and it should get back an array of these numbers, and it needs to sum those up and return that. So I'm going to say expect sum to equal 800. And I'm going to go ahead and make sure that the calorie reader is past this spy. I'm going to rename this a stub because this is a stub, not a spy. And yeah, I hope that makes sense. Again, we didn't touch the implementation. We don't actually have code that's going to do this logic. So the first step is like run your test, make sure it fails. I'll go ahead and run this test here. And we should see it fail because, you know, sum should probably not be defined, or it should be throwing an exception because it says invalid command passed, right? So that makes sense. The test is actually verifying that we can call index. So now we have a failing test and we think our test looks good. We kind of read through it. We double checked it. It makes sense. We have a stub. Now we need to go to our index file and we need to add support for this command, right? Which also means we need to add support for extending the interface for the calorie reader. So let's go here. I'm gonna go ahead and say this can also take in a calorie reader. And we need to basically just kind of extend this if else block. I'm gonna say else if command is equal to, I think it was sum. Then we're gonna do some other logic here. So in this case, we're gonna basically say return calorie reader, and I believe I can just call it like that. So let's run this. Let's hope this works. I'm going to go ahead and run this again, and our test should hopefully pass. If not, we might just need to tweak some things. So expected the sum. Oh, of course, expected the sum to be 800, but we received 100, 400, and 300. So we do need to do some extra logic. So what the idea is the sum command is supposed to read all of the calories we have stored, and we have to sum them, right? So I'm going to say all calories, and I'm going to go ahead and call await on that because I believe this is going to be an asynchronous function. And what we need to do is we need to sum them up. So we can say return all calories dot reduce. I could say sum current, sum plus current, and start it at 0. In fact, I don't think you need to start it at 0. I think you just do this. So if you're not familiar with reduce, it's a way to kind of loop through your array and like kind of aggregate stuff together. It's typically used for summing stuff up. It's a kind of a shorthand for summing stuff up. So if I wrote that code correctly, our test is going to pass. So let's just pause for a second and kind of understand what test-driven development has helped us do. It actually helped me realize that I can't just return the results of calorie reader, right? I need to actually take the result of calorie reader, which happens to be an array of calories, and I need to actually sum them, right? So this logic needs to sum my results. And I think the test kind of helped me verify that I'm doing it correctly because I did just forget a major step when I was kind of implementing the logic. All right, so we have, that's all working. Now, in order to get this to work with the command line, we kind of need to further this with an integration test. So I'm gonna go ahead and go to this integration test. And what I like to do with integration tests is it's okay to like test different parts of your functionality in a single test file. So we can kind of just add on another test here. Some people don't like doing that. Some people would rather test that functionality separate, but it's really up to you, whatever you want to do. So in this case, we have a test already, which calls the command line with the add command, and it passes 500, and then it verifies that the 500 was written to a file called calories.out. All right, so we need to just add on and verify that after you've added the 500 to this file and the 133, that when you sum them up, we get back 633. So I'm going to say should, I'm also going to do this. I'm going to put a describe here. In Jest, you can kind of nest stuff like this. And again, I don't know if this is the best approach. There's like 1,001 ways you can write code. But I'm going to go ahead and make two different describe blocks. So one's going to be for the add command and one's going to be for the sum command. because we want to test the different like features of our application. So the first block is all about adding. Okay, so it verifies the add command works. The second block is all about summing. So we're going to go ahead and call sum here. And we're going to say should correctly sum all calories in the calories.out file and print them or something. All right, so how does this integration test work? Well, it runs the CLI command and it passes the sum command and hits enter. And what we should expect to get is if we were to run this command here, we should get some type of standard out, right? So we need to verify that the standard out should equal 633. We might have to tweak this a little bit. Maybe standard out will add like a new line character. I'm not sure. But that's kind of the test I think we need to do. We don't care about error here, so I'll delete that. I guess you have to have it in. Yeah, so let's run this. This should fail because we're doing test-driven development, so we have to write a failing test first. So if I run this integration test, it should add 500 to the file. It should add 133, and then it should also try to run the sum command, but we didn't implement logic for the sum command yet, right? So this thing just crashes. It doesn't actually do anything. And what we could do, so notice here, it just prints out nothing. There is no 633. So our test is failing, and that's actually expected. So now we have to go to the CLI, and we need to add in more functionality. So how can we make this test pass? Well, what we can do is look at what we're doing wrong. And one thing that we're doing wrong is that the index file that we're calling here, we didn't pass it the reader, right? We didn't pass it calorie reader. So we need to make sure we actually do that. And we can kind of create one up here by just simply saying const calorie reader is going to be a function that is going to basically just do an fs.read file sync of ./calories .out. And we could probably also split on the new line character like so. We might also need to trim on the new line character as well. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, so I mean, if we were using TypeScript, this would have warned us that we didn't pass the correct thing in here, but let's just test our code by running our integration tests. So this should hopefully use fs, which I actually don't have included here. So let me go ahead and require fs. And then you might argue that it's probably better to pull this out into a separate file, which I might do in a second, but I want to show you that if we've written our test correctly, then this test should pass, or at least give us an insight into like what we're doing wrong. All right, so again, I think it's still not printing out anything to the console. And the issue is if we look at the CLI test, we're expecting something to come out to standard out, but we don't have a console log anywhere, right? So I need to basically keep track of the results here. I could say const then, just say output, and I'm gonna say console log output. How about that? Let's try running this again and see like what happens if we were to try to do this. All right, so what are we doing wrong? So we are calling index, we're passing calorie reader, which is a function that reads in a file, and then it trims off the new line character and it splits everything by the new line character. So if we were to go into this function, we should be getting here. So I mean, we might need to add some console logs, like we are in sum, and then we also want to kind of like print out what all calories is. Maybe calorie reader is not actually splitting these things up correctly into an array. So luckily you don't have to like manually run your command line tool. You can just run your integration test and they'll tell you if you've done something wrong, or they'll kind of pinpoint what you don't have working right. So let's go back up here. So we are getting to, we are in sum, but we are getting empty. There's a console log happening where nothing is printing out. And the issue is probably I'm just reading the wrong file location. So let me go ahead and go back to like where this thing is happening. So we're at index and we're trying to read in, I'm sorry, so we have to go to CLI. And I kind of wonder if I'm not really sure why it's not printing out anything. So why is this not working? Let's go back to the test real quick. Maybe there's something wrong with our test. Maybe after all is like deleting the file before we've actually finished using it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and print out a log here. There might be something that I'm not fully understanding about Jest, but if after all prints out more than once, then I've kind of misunderstood how the after all works. Maybe it runs after every describe block, which would be not good. Okay, so it only prints once. And I'm going to go ahead and try to figure out why this is not working. So sometimes this is a joy of coding. You know, it's going to be a simple issue that I'm just running into. I just need to figure this out. So let's just take a step back. We have a test that runs node source CLI sum. We look at this. All that does is it passes the command to index. We're also passing calorie reader, which is a function that reads in this calories.out file. And we might need to add more console log here to figure out what's going on. I mean, maybe we should have done more test-driven development over this section, but I'm gonna go ahead and just do this. Go ahead and do this. I'm gonna print out what calories is. And then I'm gonna go ahead and just return this and see what happens. There's just something simple that we're probably doing wrong, but. All right, so let's scroll up. Is actually printing out calories anywhere? And it doesn't even seem like it's printing the calorie reader, which is interesting. I mean, it should be, because we take calorie reader, we pass it to index, and this is called calories reader. Okay, so I'm making a really, really dumb mistake by calling it calories reader. So either I need to go back and change this to be calories reader, change this to be calories reader, and rerun this test. So it's always a dumb mistake. And honestly, this is why you should use TypeScript. I know I made a video in the past where I'm like, I hate TypeScript, blah, 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 but TypeScript is going to point out that issue, and it would have saved me some time where I didn't waste all that time. Okay, so I think the issue is again, we had a buffer coming back, but really we need to read in UTF-8. I never know if it's the one with the hyphen or not, but I think it works either way. So I'm just going to go ahead and make sure you read in with UTF-8. And that should give back a string that has like, have like a CSV with like new line characters. All right, so at this point I have so many console logs, I don't really know what's going on. So we printed out calories here. And we got back 500, new line character, 133. And then we are getting 500 and 133. And I think we also just need to basically say map, and I'm going to say number. I think I can cast them all to numbers like this. So at this point, I'm kind of regretting this. This has a lot of logic in it, right? This thing should have been done with test-driven development. I think this is one of the key reasons why I'm running into so many issues, is because I didn't really test this stuff out. So let's actually just stop with this integration test for a second. And I'm going to go ahead and make a new file here called caloriereader.js. And this is going to be module.exports. It's going to be a function that takes in a file path, and then it's going to return a function. So very similar to the other file appender where we take in a log file and then we take in a calories. I'm going to do something similar. But I'm going to try to actually test this first. So using test-driven development, I'm going to make a new file called caloriesreader.test.js. And let me rename this. I keep forgetting the S with calories reader. And at this point, you know, we could also pass an FS if you wanted to, just so it's a little bit easier to test. I know you can use jest.mock, but it's just easier to just pass in the dependencies. And I'm also going to pass this in as a named object like this. So let's go to our test here. And we're going to try to write a test for this interface first, make sure this thing does exactly what it's supposed to do. So I'm going to say describe calories reader. And then that's going to have one it statement that says should return an array of calories when a calories.log out file has 500 comma or 500 new line character, 133 new line character. Okay. So basically the exact same scenario that we're trying to code for in an integration test, we're just going to codify it here with a test. Okay. So first, let's import the calories reader from, require calories reader. And this is going to be an async function. So let's make sure we put async in our it statement here. And I'm going to go ahead and just say results or calories is equal to a weight of calories reader. And remember, this interface takes in a file path, which in our case, we could just do like ./calories.out. Then it also takes in fs. So we're going to stub out fs because we want to make this as simple as possible. And fs has a function called read file sync, which when you call it, I am just going to return 500 new line character, 133 new line character. That's it. So when the calories reader calls this internal function, we are kind of mocking this out using dependency inversion, like the calories reader is the thing that's taken in fs. I could rename this as something else if I wanted to, like file reader, I guess. Or I could just call it read file. I'm just going to call it fs right now. No, actually, I'm going to call it file reader. Sorry, I'm jumping around. So I'm changing the interface a little bit. Let's go back to the test, change this to file reader. And this is actually going to be a function that takes in a file path and returns this. And in our case, we don't care about file path here anyway because we're stubbing this out. But the idea is you call this calories reader. It should call at some point this file reader. That should give back that number. And then calories, I'm going to say expect calories to equal 633. I want to verify it's a number. All right, so again, trying to do test-driven development. So you run this. This should fail because it's going to say like this doesn't return anything. And it said it got back undefined, which is, that's expected. So let's try to implement some logic to make this test pass. Basically, what we need to do is we need to say file contents is equal to file reader of file path. That should read in the file, and we should get back the contents. And I'm going to say return file contents dot trim. Get rid of any of the new line characters. And then I'm going to say, you know what? I'm dumb. Let's go back. This shouldn't return 533. This should return 500 and 133. Okay, that's the proper test. All it's supposed to do is convert the file to an array. Then we can sum it later on. So we need to trim it. We need to split it by the new line character. And we are going to, I guess we could map it to a number here. I don't really know. Maybe it would make more sense. Yeah, I think it makes sense that. Let's try running this, see what happens. So we should get back an array of 500, 133, and our test is passing. Everything's good. So I should have done this from the get-go. Again, getting into the test-driven development mindset is hard. Sometimes you get carried away. You start messing with more implementation, more logic, and then you get down this rabbit hole of like trying to fix a bug when you should have just written a test to begin with. So this was a prime example of why I should have just done test-driven development from the get-go, right? But you live and you learn. So we have a test now. We have a little helper module that we can use. And again, what we're trying to do is make the integration test pass. And in order to get that integration test passing, we need to basically go to our CLI. And I'm going to import calories reader here. So I'm going to go ahead and say like const calories reader is equal to require calories reader. And remember, to make the calories reader, we have to basically, I'm going to go ahead and say calories reader factory. I'm going to go ahead and call this. And I'm going to go ahead and mock out, I think we had file reader, which was supposed to return the contents of a file. So if I just do this, I believe that should be fine. And then I think the other thing we needed to do was like asset file path. File path. I don't know if I made this more complicated than I should have, but let's do this. Y'all lost now? You're all confused? I'm sometimes getting confusing myself. So we call the factory, we pass it the file reader, we pass it the path. Technically we could have just like combined these. I don't know why I have these as being separated. But I mean, anyway, it works. So what I need to do is instead I need to pass calories reader here, which we already do. And let's try running this integration test. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this test. I'm going to say npx jest, run that test, and hopefully everything works. Makes the file, should write to the file, and then at some point it should fail like it always does. All right, what are we doing wrong here? So I think the issue we have is that we have a bunch of different console logs in our code base, and our test is kind of like expecting certain logs to happen and not happen. So let's delete those console logs that we were not expecting and try to run it one more time. Okay, still failing. I feel like we're so close to getting this working, but for some reason I just can't get it working. So if I go back up to what this prints out, so like all calories, I'm going to go ahead and say const sum is equal to this and return sum. I want to go ahead and make sure I'm console logging the sum here. What are we doing wrong? Let me run this one more time. This thing is supposed to take the output, which in our case, the output was sum. And it should have logged it out, I believe, which we're logging. So if I scroll back up, we are in the sum. We get all calories is 500 and 133. We get sum of 633. And then we should be here, output. All right, so maybe there's like a new line character. I don't know. Let's just try it one more time and see if output prints out. But the idea is like our test was supposed to verify that console log was actually printed out. But yeah, I mean, we're definitely getting 163. So I think the code works fine. I think there's just something wrong with our test. So let's just go ahead and delete these extra console logs, run it again, and we're going to look at this test real quick and see like what are we not doing correctly? Why is standard out not working? Okay, so at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say node source CLI add 500 and then node source CLI sum and see if that prints out 500. So the command line tool works perfectly fine. There's just something else going on right here, which I'm not really sure what's going on. Maybe I'm not asserting the right thing here. So let me just go ahead and print out standard out real quick. Standard out is 633. Expected that to equal 633, but for some reason this is failing. This is probably a stupid issue. I probably have a new line character at the end. Let me just do that. I think standard out will append a new line character, so you have to, yeah, that's stupid. All right, anyway, I'm sorry for wasting all your time, but this is the issue. Our code was working fine, but there's like a new line character that gets printed out. So our test wasn't even working the correct way. So sometimes that happens when you're doing test-driven development, you're writing tests, you actually write a bad test. So you want to make sure that you triple check everything you do in your test file, because your test file is a source of truth, right? If you write this thing wrong, that means you're going to be implementing your logic wrong. So yeah, this works. This integration test works, and our application is now a little bit more robust. There's a lot of stuff I probably would have changed up or refactored, but overall, I mean, I think this is pretty cool. I just wanted to touch more on test-driven development and kind of give you more walkthroughs of like how I can continue to use it to build out something larger. I know this whole application is like super small, and we're just like adding and writing and summing up stuff, but this stuff adds up, right? So if someone, like, imagine if I worked on this for 5 days straight, you can imagine how complicated this could get. And if you're on a team of multiple people, very easy to add some functionality and break it for everybody else, right? Someone could easily just come in here and add a console log, and they would break this integration test because our tests expect certain things to print out. So I hope that kind of helped you out. If you enjoyed watching this, give me a thumbs up. Anyway, have a good day and happy coding.